Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest in a series of webinars brought to you by Brentwood Chamber of Commerce, Brentwood Business Partnership and Brentwood Borough Council. My name is Colin Barber and I'm the chairman of Brentwood Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to be the host of today's webinar. I run a business called The Management Mechanic, which is a training and development consultancy specialising in the application of psychology in business. My key theme is helping you understand how people work. As I say, this is the third in a series of webinars, which we're at the moment running twice a week on behalf of the three organisations which I mentioned. The purpose being obviously to help you through the various things which are happening during the corona crisis and during these difficult times for many of us. Today's presenter is actually myself. So far we've had Chris Bushell talking about crisis management. We've had Lindsay Salmon talking about the various ins and outs of HR and furloughing, if that's how you say it, furlough or furloughing anyway. And today myself talking about the subject of choosing your attitude, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But most importantly of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and hope you find the seminar interesting and enjoyable and take something away from it. Just to flag up also, just in case I don't mention it at the end, we are always on the lookout for more presenters for webinars. So if you think you'd be interested in and you've got a subject which you feel will be relevant to business people in Brentwood, not necessarily directly related to the corona crisis, but the sort of things that people are interested in finding out more about at the moment. Or it might be that you've got a subject which you think people would be interested in because they've perhaps got some people have more free time on their hands or working at home and more practical in terms of how they allocate their workload. So do let us know if you are interested in presenting a seminar, or indeed if you know someone else who might be interested. There's two formats really which could take. It could either be yourself doing a PowerPoint presentation, or it could be, as it was with Lindsay from the HR organisation, me just putting questions to her which have been supplied to me both in advance and during the webinar itself. If you do want to get in touch with us, then the email address for that is webinar@brentwoodchamber.co.uk. So the background to this is that we at the Brentwood Chamber of Commerce, Brentwood Borough Council and Brentwood Business Partnership have worked very closely over the past few years, and some of you indeed may have attended joint training events at the town hall. Obviously with them being suspended, we had the idea of carrying on the same idea with these joint webinars, and one of the benefits obviously, as always, is they are free of charge for you to attend. Incidentally, again, just to flag up in case I forget at the end, this webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube, as are the previous two webinars available to view on YouTube. So if you've got a friend or a colleague who isn't able to watch it this morning, then do let them know. We should have a YouTube up and running either late this afternoon or over the weekend, but we'll keep you posted. Send out an email to all those of you who've attended today. I think that's all the sort of introductory things to mention, apart from just a couple of practical points. I'm guessing by now probably quite a few of you, it's not your first webinar that you've watched, but if just in case those of you aren't so familiar with Zoom and how it all works, if you could just be aware that there are some buttons which you can use during the seminar. I've already actually have quite an important one from someone who said they have no sound. Is everyone muted? There is a chat button, so if a couple of you, if you can hear me, can you send me a message to say whether you can hear me or not? If you wouldn't mind hitting the send button. I actually found that same person just sent me a message saying they can hear me now, so I'm hoping everyone can hear me. That's quite important. So yeah, just to say there are some buttons at the bottom of your screen which may disappear unless you move your finger or move your mouse to the screen. It's normally at the bottom of the screen. There's a Q&A button, there's a chat button, and they're the two which are really relevant to you today. I will try and keep the seminar interactive, so there will be a couple of times when I might ask you to fire either some points at me on the chat, or there might be some questions I want to ask you. So actually the key point written right from the start is if you've got any questions at all about anything which I'm talking about, then the best time to ask the question is right there when it's fresh in your mind. Send off a question to me. It only comes to me, it doesn't go to all the other people that are attending. So I always say to people when I'm running training courses, if you've got a question which you think is stupid, it's probably not stupid, and probably half the people there have got the same question as well. So any questions are welcome, and it will be anonymous, and I'm the only one who'll see the question. And as I say, the best time to ask the question is whilst it's there fresh in your mind. It may well be something which I'm going to talk about later on anyway, in which case I can obviously move on to that when I come to it. But as I say, do let me know if you do have any questions. So moving on to the subject of today's webinar, which, as I say, is choosing your attitude. Just to tell you first of all about my background and how I come to be presenting this webinar today. My background, starting right at the beginning, I studied business studies and psychology, which back in the day was quite an odd combination. I never really knew where I'd use them both. And actually, I did use them quite a lot when my first, well, not my first job, but my first long-term job in business was in marketing. I worked for a company called Thompson Holidays, and they were a very proactive marketing company. And I did find that my psychology was very useful in marketing. And I've also worked in customer services and various other roles within the travel business. But for the last, oh gosh, over 25 years now, I've been working as a freelance consultant, running training companies and providing one-to-one coaching, consultancy, and also running training courses around the theme of understanding how people work. I've also run several businesses, and during the time when I was working as a freelance trainer, I also ran a holiday company for about 10 years, specialising in holidays, educational holidays for school children, so group holidays for school children, which was a very good way of keeping in touch with what's happening in the travel business. But more recently, as I say, my primary focus is psychology and understanding people and what it is that makes them work effectively, and indeed what is it that helps us enjoy our work. There's been quite a lot of information and talks flying around in the past month or so about money and finance and cash flow and HR issues and laws and job retentions and redundancies or not redundancies and furloughs and all that sort of thing. But I thought it would be a good idea if we just paid a little bit of attention to ourselves and how we ourselves are managing the crisis, how we're coming through it, how we're getting on with it. Hence the title of today's event, which is Choose Your Attitude. And I personally believe, and actually, let me just ask you a little, one other one which I didn't mention to you. I've got a quick poll here. I've not used this one before, so I'm going to try this poll. I fired a quick question up on the screen, and if you could just respond to that question, it might be interesting just to see what the general response is. I'm guessing to a certain extent the sort of person that is watching today may well fall into a certain category, but let's just see how it's going. And as I suspected, we are having at the moment 100% of you watching saying that yes, you do agree, and that choosing your attitude can influence how you come through this period. So that's good news for me, because obviously that's going to make it a little bit easier for me in my presentation today. However, it's probably worth my while saying that there may be some things I say to you today which you totally disagree with. There may be some things which you disbelieve, which is fair enough, because it is all subjective. I'm not talking about facts and figures. I'm talking about subjectivity and how we approach things. If you do disagree with something I'm saying, then that's fine. But what I would recommend is that just for the period of this webinar, if you sort of suspend your disbelief and say, okay, how about if that actually was true? How about if that actually did happen? You know, just try it on the side, just see how it feels, just to sort of adopt a different belief from what you would normally hold about something. So coming back to the reason, one of the reasons why I chose this webinar today is several years ago I read a book called Man's Search for Meaning by a psychotherapist called Viktor Frankl, who some of you may have heard of. And the reason why he became so famous, he probably would have been quite a well-admired psychotherapist anyway, but he was around during the time of the Second World War. He was Jewish, he was from Vienna, and he was one of the people who was captured and sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. And he survived. He was one of the people who survived. I think he was about mid-30s when he actually went to the camp, and he later got transferred to Dachau in Germany. But being a psychotherapist, obviously he was studying the people in the camp and finding out what it was about people, how it was they survived, which ones didn't survive. And obviously being fit helped to a certain extent, but he found that that wasn't the most important factor in terms of who got through the ordeal. And what he found was the ones who got through the ordeal, or most easily to get through the ordeal, were the ones who had a purpose to their life. Now, you may think, well, if you're in a concentration camp and you know the next day you might get sent to the gas chambers, you're doing the same old mediocre work every day, how can you have a purpose? But the book does go on to describe just how a purpose doesn't necessarily have to be something major. Even if it's just a purpose for getting out of bed in the morning, then that did help to motivate the people. And he later went on, after the end of the war, he then later went on to write about his experience, hence the book Man's Search for Meaning. Excuse me. The reason that's relevant today is because I guess it was probably about a week into the crisis, he came back into my mind, and I thought, oh, I'll reread that book. It's not a long book, it's quite a short read, and it did remind me about how important it is to be aware, first of all, obviously, to believe that you can influence how you're thinking about things, but more importantly, to be constantly aware that your attitude will affect how things proceed for you during your life. So let's have a look at the itinerary today. Just give you an idea of what we're going to be experiencing. I'm just point out to you, I do have two screens in my office, and one of them's got a PowerPoint on, so I'm flicking between the two, and hopefully it does all work. But we'll see how we get on with this. So I'm just going to bring up the second screen and show you the itinerary. Just do that. Right, so you should now be able to see our plan for today. So choose your attitude. I've divided it into 7 little tips to give you this morning. First one, embracing change, which is a lot of that going on at the moment. Let go of fear. There's a lot of fear around at the moment. Look for the positive, which is an underlying theme for everything, I guess. Let go of entitlement. I'll explain a bit more about that when we come on to it. Your circle of influence, you may be aware of this already, or you may have heard of it under a different term. The solution exists. That's all about belief systems. And finally, create your future. What I'd like you to do just very quickly now, though, it will be a little bit interactive, this seminar. Obviously, it's not that I'm the only person that's actually talking, but you're talking to me via the chat and via the share button. So what I'd like you to do is just jot down, if you've got a piece of paper, or if you're in the modern world and you want to jot it down on the computer, just jot down what do you actually want from today's webinar. So thinking about why you actually joined the webinar today in the first place, but what do you actually want? What would you like to have achieved by the end of this webinar? This is just purely for information only, just so you can have a little think about what it is you want. If you want to share it with me, then I'd be quite happy for you to send it into me on the chat, so I can just get an idea of what it is you want from the webinar. So keep me posted, and as I say, that's primarily for your benefit, so you've got an idea at the end of the webinar. Obviously you can check back and think, well, actually, did I get what I wanted from the webinar? Okay, so just coming on then to a little bit more about the choosing your attitude. Again, forgive me whilst I just share the screen. And also, I've mentioned already about Viktor Frankl, who found it important, but just to let you know, a couple of other people who sort of thinking along the same lines as well, that your belief system influence what's happening to you and how you react to things. William Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So in other words, it's really all about how you actually view things, which will influence how things proceed for you. And secondly, Abraham Lincoln, most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. So again, it's all about how you choose to be, how you choose to react to a given situation. I've already asked you that, do you believe it's possible? And I'm glad to say that everyone watching today did believe it's possible. But this is, to me, a very important quote. The one thing which you can never be taken away from you is your ability to choose your attitude and response to a situation. And this is really the nub of what Viktor Frankl was writing about in his book. No matter what the Nazis were doing to the people in the concentration camp, there was still the one thing which they always possessed, and that was the ability, or the choice to choose what their attitude was. And that's very, very important in terms of how we follow through in terms of for example, in this situation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not for any way suggesting that the coronavirus is anything like what experienced the Jews in Nazi Germany, but I'm just giving the example that how we react to a crisis and how we choose our attitudes to a crisis will very much influence how we come out of it. Just moving on to the next slide. So what we're going to talk about now is the change, first of all, embracing change. That's the first item on the agenda. Now, the most important thing to mention to you at the moment is that probably most of us are going through a bigger period of change than we've experienced in the last, well, possibly some of us for many, many years. Now is the time of change. There's lots of things different in our life, from the minor points like having to queue up to go to the shops, or having to think about whether we go out or whether we meet someone, or if we do meet someone, you know, making sure we're standing a safe distance, all that sort of thing. So what that actually means is that our brains at the moment, the part of our brain which deals with change is very, very active. Now, for some of us, the part of, we may have been living a very comfortable, easygoing life and very routine, and the part of the brain which deals with change was probably actually quite dormant. But for all of us, that part of the brain has been woken up. Now, the reason that's significant is that it means that part of the brain is sort of active and ready and waiting. So it's actually prepared to deal with change. I'm sure probably by now most of you have sort of got over the initial shock period when everything was a bit up in the air and you weren't really sure how to deal with it. You didn't know whether you still had to get out of bed at the same time because you didn't have to go to the office, things like that. We are adapting to that, but we've proved to our brain that we're very flexible and able to deal with change. And what that means is this is a great opportunity for you to embrace change. You can think about how you want to change in terms of right now, in the next few days, next few weeks, but also it's an opportunity for us to embrace change in terms of moving on and moving forward with our lives. And change is actually healthy. It's not a bad thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, although I'm trying to look at the positive side of coronavirus, I'm not saying that coronavirus is a good thing, but it's with us. You know, let's face it, there's nothing we can do about it. It is here. So the key point is actually to look for the positive and think, okay, we've got this virus. Obviously, we want to support the health workers and everything to help the people who are suffering from coronavirus. But leaving that aside, if we deal with the actual impact on everyone's lives, what we want to do is think, okay, well, it's here. Let's try and make it as positive as you can and see what we can gain from it. And history does teach us, there's lots of evidence to this effect, that the survivors in life are the ones who innovate. So now is a time for innovation, and that applies to people, organisations, multinational companies. The ones who innovate are the ones who will survive and the ones who will prosper. And it's worth thinking about, just whilst I'm talking even, what do you do differently now? What are you doing differently that you weren't doing before the coronavirus, that you may well continue to do after the crisis? If there's something you've done in the last 3 or 4 weeks, you thought, actually, that's really good, I've really found that useful, I've really enjoyed that, I'm going to carry on with that for the rest of my life, or certainly for the next few years, and see how it goes. So be constantly aware of how you are actually benefiting, how your mind is adapting to change, and how it's helping you to move forward. So the next one, just moving back to my shared screen again. Excuse me for this, I'm just a little bit just getting used to the PowerPoint here. So as I say, embrace change. Your brain is ready and waiting. So let go of fear. Now, fear is a very prevalent emotion when we're experiencing something which we're not used to, for obvious reasons. We don't actually know what's going to happen. We don't know how it's going to affect us, and it's quite scary. But the point, as I mentioned here, is fear is only ever in the waiting room. So sometimes we worry about things that actually aren't going to ever happen, or we worry about them so much whilst we're waiting for them to happen. But actually, when we go up and to get on and do those things, they're not as bad as we thought they were. So if there's something you're scared of doing, then my advice is actually do it. But secondly, don't be afraid of things which may never happen anyway. So try and concentrate more on dealing with the things which you can deal with, rather than worrying about things which may never happen. That's not to say you shouldn't be preparing for things which might happen, but it's just to say don't spend too much time worrying about the sort of things which may never happen to you anyway. And indeed, moving on from that, if you weren't holding fear about something, what would you do if you were not afraid? Is there something you're thinking about doing? Again, it might be related to your business, it might be a change of direction in your business that you're thinking of doing, but you're a little bit afraid of the consequences. Well, now is the time to be innovative and to try new things and see how they actually work and try them out. What I'd like you to do now, just very briefly, is I'd like you to write down, again, you can share them with me on chat if you want, or you can just jot them down on a scrap of paper or wherever, 3 words which spring to mind to you describing coronavirus. Just 3 words which come to your mind to describe coronavirus. Okay, and don't spend too much time on this. I'd suggest you write down almost the first 3 words that come to your mind. How's that looking? Okay, what I'd like you to do now is look at those 3 words which you've got there, and just look at each word and ask yourself, is that a negative word or a positive word? Now, this is an opportunity for you to actually think about how you're viewing things that are going on at the moment. So if you are thinking about the negative things, then that's where your mind's tending to go. So we do need to try and focus on thinking about the positive things which are happening in our lives. What I would suggest you do is, for example, if you maybe make a list of the good things and the bad things which are affecting you at the moment. And with the bad things, just try and think, okay, is it really that bad? Is there a positive side to it? And again, I'm not sort of belittling some of the bad things which are happening at the moment, but there is always something positive we can find even in the worst of situations. So do try and focus your mind on things which actually maybe aren't quite as bad as they might seem at the time. And the ongoing message here is that the more time you spend looking at the positive side of things, then the more you'll actually find that you'll come out of it feeling more positive, and you'll feel a more, how can I put it, you'll look back on the coronavirus and think, actually, in fact, that was a positive time. There were some good experiences. Let's say here, we're often faced with great opportunities, and they're often disguised as problems, and that's the key. Every problem which comes to us does have a potential to be a great opportunity. So let's move on to the next one, which I think is very, very significant. Let go of entitlement. Now, what that means is, as I've said here in the summary, the world owes you nothing. Now, many of you think, well, actually, in fact, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. The world owes me nothing. But some people do actually go through life. And when I say the world, it means no one. No one owes you anything. The government don't owe you anything. Your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, whatever, your children don't owe you anything. The local authority don't owe you anything. No one owes you anything. You are totally responsible for your life. Now, the benefit of that is, it means if you think, well, actually, no one owes me anything, it's up to me to actually make sure I get what I want in life. It's up to me to look after yourself. Then the benefit of that is you will feel responsible for yourself, and you'll feel more in control of what's happening in your life. And also, it means that you won't go through life blaming someone else, because if no one else is responsible for it, then you've got no one to blame. So it creates a more positive feeling about what's happening. To me, probably the best example of that is social media. If you look on, I guess probably Facebook groups is the most obvious one. If you look at Facebook groups and you see the prevalence, and this isn't just during coronavirus, it's actually before coronavirus, the prevalence of people looking to blame someone else for something which is happening. Because it makes them feel good. It gives them the short-term hit. Okay, if they can blame someone else and they're not responsible for it, it's not their fault. But on the other hand, as long as you blame someone else and think someone else is responsible for what's happening in your life, then it means you're losing control, because if someone else is responsible for it, then what you're saying in effect, I can't do anything about it. It's not my fault. Now that may make you feel good in the short term, but it's not actually the way which will actually help you progress in the long term. And it's not the sort of type of thinking which successful people would have, and hence the idea: let go of entitlement. The world owes you nothing. Strictly speaking, it's maybe not true, but it's quite a good mindset to take on board, to think actually the world owes me nothing, and it also helps you to step out of your comfort zone. one of the things I often talk to people about when I'm doing training courses is step out of your comfort zone. Even if you don't stay out of your comfort zone, it's quite a good opportunity just to try and see how it feels and how you progress when you're outside of your comfort zone. Just moving on to the next one, which to me is a very, very significant one. Now, I had a conversation with someone literally earlier in the week about how they were coping with the coronavirus. And briefly, what they said to me was, snowed under with work, really busy, not necessarily positive money spinning work, but more snowed under with client inquiries and things, and the sort of inquiries which they weren't used to. So they were finding it very stressful, very difficult. And they said to me, well, in actual fact, what I ended up doing is I made a list of the things which are within my control and the things which aren't within my control. And they said, oh, well, that's actually helping me a lot. And I thought to myself, oh, okay. And I said to them, actually, in fact, what you're talking about is the circle of influence, or more, to give its more full title, the circle of concern and the circle of influence. Well, let's just have a look at it here on the screen. So if you imagine this is a circle of concern, so in that blue circle of concern are all the things which you're worried about in your life at the moment, everything which you're concerned about, everything which is worrying you, everything that you're thinking, what can I do about that? Now, it doesn't mean that you may not be able to do anything about it, but you're concerned about it. And as always in life, there's things which we're concerned about, which we've got no control over, but they still worry us. Then let's move on to the circle of influence. Now, the circle of influence, the light blue circle, is a smaller circle, because we can't influence everything, and typically it sits inside that circle of concern. So there's a certain amount of things which we're concerned about in life which we can influence, and you will know if you think about it which things you can influence and which things you can't influence. It's not necessarily as black and white as that. There's some things you can influence partly, or some things which you might be able to influence with someone else. But broadly speaking, if you can divide your things which are worrying, concerning you in life into the things which you can do something about, i.e. things you can influence, and the things which you can't do anything about. And then just to sort of flick back to that screen and then just come forward to the next one, you'll see the blue circle has grown, the light blue circle, because one of the things I would encourage you to do is to expand your circle of influence. Now, what this is actually referring to is where you spend your thinking time, and that's a crucial point. It's not so much the actual quantity of influence you've got, it's what you think about. Where is your attention? So if you're spending a lot of your attention focused on things which concern you, but you can't do anything about, in effect, that's wasted energy because you can't do anything about it. So why worry about it? Whereas if you can spend your thinking time thinking about things which you can influence and expanding your circle of influence, so that most of your time is spent on things which you actually have some influence over, then you will feel more positive about things because you can actually make a difference. You're actually influencing what's happening in your life. So you're taking ownership of what's happening in your life. And again, just referring back to the previous subject, that means you're letting go of the sense of entitlement. And it's useful for you to think about, well, how much time do you actually spend in each circle? And it comes back to the example I just gave before about the list of things which are worrying you at the moment. And so you can do it as a list, or you can do it as a circle, whichever you choose to do. But when you spend time in the circle of concern, you tend to be worrying about things, I say, which things are outside your control. You tend to be looking for weaknesses in others, because obviously if you can blame someone else, then it means you don't have to worry about it, insofar as you don't have to worry about finding a solution. It tends to be quite reactive, and it tends to breed a culture of a victim culture. So you feel as though you're the victim, which again can make you feel better in the short run, but it doesn't actually help you in the long run. Whereas if you spend your time in a circle of influence, then you feel as though you have ownership of things. You actually feel as though things can change, and it does create a positive energy, and it's the positive energy which counts, and that will actually be self-fulfilling, because the more time you spend in the circle of influence, the more positive you'll feel about yourself, the more confident you'll be, and the more the circle of influence will actually expand. And the other point to stress is that the only place where you can make change is within the circle of influence. So try and focus your time on the circle of influence, and if you catch yourself going outside the circle of influence into the circle of concern, then that's the time when you want to think about, oh, where am I actually spending my time? And you can also do it looking back. You can actually think to yourself, well, okay, yesterday, how much time did I spend on things which actually I could influence, or how much time did I spend just worrying about things which in reality I couldn't do anything about? So that's the next tip for you. And just moving on to the solution exists. Now this is, as I say, more about a belief. It doesn't necessarily hold true, but if you go through life on the assumption that every problem has a solution, which in some ways you could argue that at some level there is a solution, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll find a solution. But if you hold the belief that every problem has a solution, then it means that you will again have a much more positive approach to problems, and you won't feel so sort of drained or worn out, because you'll think, actually, I'm actually making progress towards a solution because I know the solution exists. A couple of examples of that. The one which is probably quoted most often is the American Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb. Now the story goes, and there's many different versions of the story, but broadly speaking, the story goes that he spent many years trying to invent the light bulb, and it's quite difficult to invent something which hasn't already been invented, because he obviously had this idea that you could generate light through electricity, shall we say, but he wasn't quite sure how he was going to do it, and he spent many years trying to achieve it. And he was interviewed by his local newspaper at one stage, because obviously the story got out about all this time this madman was trying to create light from electricity. And the journalist said to him, well, you spent all this time, you failed so many different times to make this light from electricity. Why are you not giving up? Why are you persisting at it if you keep on failing? And Thomas Edison's reply was, well, in actual fact, I've never failed. He said, I've just found many different ways in which you can't get light from electricity. And the more ways I find which you can't get light, then the more likely I am to actually eventually find how to get light from electricity. And obviously, hence the invention of the electric light bulb, which at the time was a major development in science, and obviously had massive implications for everyone in the world. Just as a little sideline on this, not directly related to it, but Thomas Edison had a winter home in Florida, Southwest Florida, Fort Myers. And I went there, there's a museum there, because his neighbor in Fort Myers was Henry Ford on one side, and on the other side his neighbor was Harvey Firestone of the tire manufacturer. So Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Henry Ford, as you all know, was the first person to introduce mass production of cars. And Harvey Firestone went on to create a very big tyre company. And they all state in their autobiographies or various letters they've written that one of the most important factors to help them in terms of their belief and in terms of their positive attitude was talking to each other. They all had this very firm belief. Thomas Edison believed you could get light from electricity. Harvey Firestone believed that you could use rubber to create tyres for automobiles. And Henry Ford obviously believed that it was possible to mass produce automobiles. Or more importantly, he believed that there was a market for automobiles. Most people didn't even think there was a market. Most people thought, well, why have a car when you've got a horse and cart? So it was very much a positive attitude. That is digressing slightly, but I always think it's an interesting story to tell people in terms of the best way of solving problems is also to talk about it with positive-minded people who also believe that the solution exists. And just moving on from that, the person with the most flexibility has the most influence. So the more flexibility you've got in terms of how you address your problems, then the more likely you are to be able to influence the situation. So it's all about flexibility in terms of how you approach your situations. The next one is create your future. Now, I know some of you are very busy at the moment with your work, although probably the ones who are watching this webinar may be the ones who are not quite so snowed under with work. But either way, a time of change is an excellent time to think about your future and what direction you're taking. I mean, it's a given the fact that for all of us, our lives will be slightly different in the next year or two coming out of this, either in terms of finances or in terms of what we've learned from it. Various different things will be different in our lives, there's no doubt about it. So it is a time of change, and it's an opportunity for you to think and take stock and move forward. And actually, what I would say is create a picture of your future. Think about what you actually want to do in terms of where your business is going, and also in terms of where you want to be, what you want to be doing during this coronavirus crisis. And I always say that the time to actually think about, to take stock and reflect, is the times when you are going through times of change, because that's, as I was mentioning to you earlier, that's when you're actually at a situation where you're thinking about what to do next and how to move forward. And just a couple of quotes here for you. The most important person in the room is the one who knows what to do next. And a leader's job, which many of you are, is to look into the future and see not what is, but what can be. Now, I was talking to someone, I think it was earlier in this week or last week, about the coronavirus and how people come through it. And we're actually talking about goal setting. And the thought which we shared was that the people who will benefit most from the coronavirus crisis, or the people who actually look back and think, actually, that was quite a good thing, I did quite well out of it, are the ones who actually at the beginning of the crisis, and now it's not too late, actually set themselves goals at the start of things that they wanted to achieve during the coronavirus crisis. Because if we've got goals and targets, then at least we can think, well, okay, we haven't wasted our time during this period. We've actually found that we've had a chance to achieve something which we may not have achieved if we hadn't had this sort of downtime or this change brought upon us by the coronavirus crisis. So it is a time for you to actually to really think in terms of how you can create your future and how you can move forward. So just to remind you, if you haven't already done so, if you've got any questions which you'd like to fire to me about what I'm talking about, then do let me know, because obviously I've given you a very sort of brief insight into some of these 7 points. And some of them, they're fairly simple and straightforward. Some of them they do give you opportunity to move forward a little bit in terms of where you go with them. Just have a quick check to see if there are any questions at this moment. No questions so far, but as I say, if you do have a question, then do let me know. What the question I'm going to ask you now, you remember at the beginning of the webinar, you told me what you actually wanted to achieve. So one thing I'd like to ask you is, what did you learn today from this webinar? Is there something which you can take away and think, actually, that was useful? Is it something which you think, oh yes, I already knew that, but I needed to be reminded about it? Again, feel free to share them with me, but it's mainly for your benefit to think about what you actually learned from today and what you would do differently. If you want to contact me afterwards, then feel free to contact me, Colin Barber at managementmechanic.com, and I'll be happy to answer any of your queries, either relating to what I've talked about today or more broadly in terms of how we move forward in these present times. But just before we finish, I'd like to finish by reading a story to you, and it's one which I often read to. It's just a short story, and it's about really working on yourself, which is obviously the underlying theme of today's webinar. And these words are actually written on a tomb of an Anglican bishop in the crypt of Westminster Abbey. When I was young and free, and my imagination had no limits, I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change, so I shortened my sights somewhat and decided to change only my country. But it too seemed immovable. As I grew into my twilight years, in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those closest to me. But alas, they would have none of it. And now I lie on my deathbed, and I suddenly realise, if I had only changed myself first, then by example, I would have changed my family. From their inspiration and encouragement, I would then have been able to better my country, and who knows, I may even have changed the world. So there we go, something for you to be thinking about and taking away with you. Thank you very much for listening today. As I say, if you do have any questions, then do let me know. I'll just also flag up for you the next event, which is on Tuesday of next week, when we've got Emma Good, who many of you will be familiar with from 24 Fingers, who's going to be talking to us about social media. obviously social media has been very prominent. Well, it's been very prominent generally in the last few years, but certainly it's taken a bigger share of our lives in the last few weeks. We've been stuck at home. So what it's not a training course. It's not teaching you how to use Facebook or how to use Instagram for your business. It's more of a sort of update on what's happening in social media, and most importantly, an opportunity for you to ask questions of Emma. So if you do want to join us for that one, it's next Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. And most importantly, if you want to ask a specific question, then if you send the questions in advance, then just send it to webinar@brentwoodchamber.co.uk, or indeed you can reply to the email address which you'll get when you register, and that will be available for you on Zoom to book later on today. So that's next Tuesday. And let me just do one final check before we go. No questions, so I don't know what that means. You're all happy with what I told you, or it just means that you want to go away and think about it. But anyway, as I say, that's hopefully some things which you can take away and digest. So all that remains really for me is to just say thank you very much for joining me this morning. If you've taken one or two things away from it, I think that's great. If you haven't, then do have a think about some of the things which you've talked about. And also, if you do have anything significant which you've taken away from me today, then do send me a quick chat message or send me an email. I'd be interested to hear about it from you. So it's Friday, it's sunny. If you haven't got too much work to do, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. And most importantly of all, I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend, and look forward to seeing you all again on Tuesday. Thank you.